Time ticks for everyone, and hopefully Toei remembers that. Hey guys, MasakoX here. Now, a lot of us Dragon Ball fans will remember the moment when Kid Buu was destroyed by the Super Spirit Bomb. It was the perfect way to wrap up a really ungodly long arc of Dragon Ball Z, but nonetheless, it was a pretty climactic conclusion. To remember the days when Super wasn't around and the plot was, straightforward, without confusing timelines. However, we got what we got, and that 10-year time gap between the end of the Buu arc and the end of Z was filled, for at least the most part, by the Super events and the Tournament of Power. We got about 7 of the 10 years completely wrapped up and given some kind of context historically. I mean, granted the first 4 years were completely glossed over, so I guess most of it was kind of glossed over anyway. I mean, was it 6 months? I'm not really sure. That's what it was at the Battle of Gods, so I think for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to omit that and just go by the Super timeline. It's been 4 years since the Buu arc. Super was able to cover ages 778 through 781, which means we got 3 years left until age 784, around the time when the end of Z events actually occurred. As you can tell, in Super, it does actually touch upon some of the things that happened in that 10-year time gap, including the birth of Vegeta and Bulma's second child, which we thought for the longest time would never happen, and that it was another occurrence of Toriyama forgetting things. But today, I just want to kind of talk about the things that they kind of need to do in that 3-year time gap, whether they do it in the movie, or they do it in another series of Super, or what they do after Super. There are some things that they really need to do if they want to keep the end of Z, right here, canon. Because really, I want that pose to still happen. And speaking of which, let's just start with the most obvious thing. Goten and Trunks. Yes, I know we've talked about this quite a lot, but it still stands to reason. Why do Goten and Trunks still look the same despite 4 years, no, actually more than that, occurring between the end of Z and the end of Super? They're supposed to be verging on their teens at this point, and they've not aged one bit. In fact, you could argue that Goten seems to have aged down. He's a little shorter and he's dressed in more kid-like clothing. And that tuxedo, man? Oh, that's not doing you any favors. So let's just say at the end of Super, when they've come back from their adventures on the island of 17's Island, despite it only just being like maybe a few hours, to us it felt like months, they are about 14 years old and then 13 years old respectively. And by the time we get to the end of Z, they are 18 and 17 respectively. So they've got a lot of aging up to do. And don't get me started on Marin. She still looks like a toddler? She goes from this to this in 3 years? I mean, I know children can, grow up quite quickly, but damn, man. Maybe she got it from her father, because he looked quite stubby as a kid, and then he kind of grew up pretty quickly. Let's just get back to the boys for now. Trunks at the end of Super is around about the same age as Trunks from the History of Trunks special. Now you might be thinking, well, so what? Well, you gotta remember that the History of Trunks, that's not gonna get confusing anytime soon. The two look completely different, so you can't just argue saying, oh, well, present Trunks is going through the same thing that Goku did, because he shot up between the ages of 15 and 18, because we've seen Trunks that mature at 13 years old, so why is it different? Of course, while I seem to be talking like a really, really broken record, it's still a fact that Toei doesn't really seem to acknowledge the passage of time in a very good way at all. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest understatements of the century. I mean, excuse me. You know the whole Goku Black timeline nonsense? The fact that you have to put up a timeline on your own website to explain things? Explain your plot to your audience? That means you messed up. So you really shouldn't do that. No, don't do that. And you can't even use the excuse of, oh, this will mean that the family bonding will be even more genuine. That just doesn't wash. And even if you think about Vegeta actually keeping his promise and going to a family resort with, his family, it still brings up a little bit of a concerning notion. And I'm not talking about the ice cream thing or the family buffet thing at all. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I'm talking about the whole choo-choo thing. And yes, while that must have been utterly hilarious to see Vegeta at the back of a choo-choo train, the fact that Trunks willingly enjoys it at the age of 13? That doesn't seem right. And I'm not going to be saying that, oh, just because you're 13, you can't enjoy that kind of stuff. But I'm thinking that if the purpose of Goten and Trunks for Toei is to relate to kids of that age, then kids at that age might not necessarily do that. Think back to when you were about 12 or 13. Would you be that animated at the side of a choo-choo train? I mean, did you even call it that? No, when you were 13, you probably wanted to play video games and stay up until 11 AM in the morning. I mean, I did. And yes, you can defend, in a weird, convoluted kind of way, that hybrid Saiyans probably age up differently. It's never happened before, so it's a completely new case. It doesn't mean that the same thing that happens to full-blooded Saiyans will happen to half Saiyans. When it comes to human beings, at this point, Goten and Trunks would probably be at the beginning of their adolescence and going through the typical growing pains. They should at least look a little bit taller. I mean, they don't. Goten, again, looks a little shorter. Remember the whole hubbub around episodes 69 and 70 of Super, when it looked like for just one moment that Trunks looked a little taller, or a little bit more grown up? We were all so excited that, oh, it's gonna be a time skip! You know, the fact that we're that eager to see them grow up as a collective, that is so telling. And yeah, appearances aside, it's also imperative to tweak their personalities just a little bit. At the end of Z, Trunks has become a whole lot calmer, as well as a little bit more intellectual, whereas Goten's become a little bit more jockish. It's kind of like they've gone the other way around, you know, role reversal. And yes, I know, teenagers and their personalities can shift rather quickly and unpredictably, but you kind of need some kind of groundwork to establish that happening. And in Super, we've not really had that, or at least we've not had it in some kind of good capacity. And this has to happen pretty quickly, because it can be done. We've seen it with Gohan and how he evolved into becoming such a spiffing and well-respected young man. With Gohan, we had a realistic and progressive case of aging up. We first saw him as a young boy with loads of innocence and niceness, as well as a whole heap of potential. Over the years, we saw his persona form and him actually discovering himself. We pretty much got the beginnings of his ultimate demeanor at the end of his time in the Room of Spirit and Time. He was a well-spoken young man who treated people with respect, was very considerate about other people's feelings, and just generally was really a nice person to be around and you couldn't get mad at. However, when he noticed that his loved ones were in considerate danger, he could easily step up and actually tap into his Saiyan origins and fight for the cause. We saw him change and we could believe it because we all have to go through that. So Goten and Trunks need to do the same thing in order to stay relevant and relatable. If they don't, then they're basically just like Bart Simpson or Lisa, just the Simpsons in general. After nearly 30 years, they've not aged at all. It feels odd. The next big problem that we have to talk about is something that Bulma mentioned to Goku in episode 288 of Dragon Ball Z. The fact that she hasn't seen Goku in 5 years. If the end of Z is at age 784, that means it's 779, slap bang in the middle of the Resurrection F arc. Of course, we could easily just take that as a case of hyperbole, that Bulma's just being over-exaggerated to make the point that, oh Goku, it's been so long, why didn't you actually come and see us? But do you really think that Bulma would use hyperbole here? She seemed genuinely angry. But then again, at the same time, why would she make such a big deal out of it? Because this kind of time of her not seeing Goku has happened before. Between Dragon Ball and the beginning of Dragon Ball Z, that was about 5 years, and nobody'd seen Goku really, and everyone was surprised to see the fact that Goku had a kid. But then again, let's turn to Goku for some clues. We have to take into account that at the end of Z, Goku's personality has changed, thank God. He seems to us a lot more distant, calmer, a bit more melancholic. You can see that there's something off about him. Something about this peacetime doesn't sit well with him, like there's something wrong. As a result, Goku's probably become a little bit more introverted and would rather focus on hanging around close family and training his granddaughter rather than socializing with his friends. It seems to us that he's settled after what actually happened in the last few years, after the Tournament of Power, realizing that he may never be able to get into Ultra Instinct ever again. Something about that thing and fighting Jiren, and then maybe not striving for that anymore, made him realize that, you know, what's the point? There's just no challenge anymore. We've talked about this before, and yes, I know, Jiren and Super is after the end of Z, but it kind of works in a way. And I remember that we talked about this. We thought that there'd be some kind of memory wipe or something, that everything would be reset and we get the end of Z like the entirety of Super never happened. But no, we didn't get that. No memories were wiped. At least not yet. Now let's get on to Vegeta. That's a whole other story, and thankfully it's much simpler. From where we are at the end of Super to where we get to at the end of Z, Vegeta has actually begun the journey for him to become much more chilled. His character progression is far more genuine and will transition easily into the whole Peaceful World saga much more than Goku could ever hope to. Or in fact, pretty much better than anyone else, except maybe Gohan. This is a Vegeta who has truly eschewed himself from trying to beat Kakarot all the time. It's still there, but it's not his top priority anymore. But instead, he's become the protector of Earth. Goku, in case he flakes out, means that Vegeta can step up to the top. Right here, and in pretty much any other scene, Vegeta seems more comfortable hanging around with other people, even if he's just standing around. This is a Vegeta who, thanks to him embracing the whole Super Saiyan Blue evolution thing, has managed to get comfortable in his new skin. The fact that he's not the Saiyan Prince anymore, or at least, not literally, is not an issue anymore. He's come to terms that his race has moved on and he needs to keep up with the times and evolve with them. Okay, Masako, but what does his blue form have to do with anything? Well, remember from my color theory video last week, we talked about Vegeta and his Super Saiyan Blue evolution having something to do with color theory? Well, the whole thing about that ties into this as well. Back then, Haverock and I deduced that Vegeta would never get the Ultra Instinct power because it just doesn't gel with his personality or his progression. That power is wholly Goku's, or at least not Vegeta's. It's all to do with the fact that Vegeta's far too logical and experienced in fighting. He just thinks too much. Instead, Vegeta got the Super Vegeta Blue power, which has a more cobalt tint to it. And if we look at the chakra chart, the cobalt blue color is just one step below the white of the animus of Ultra Instinct, and it denotes protection. And that's what Vegeta is. He is the protector of Earth. With the advent of Super, it made Vegeta realize that his greatest source of power, not just his ego and pride, is also the will to protect his family. So I've got to give that point to Toei. Credit where credit's due. Vegeta has progressed well. All that Vegeta needs to do now is to kind of back off the whole idea of trying to beat Kakarot. Relax about that, but give it time. So to wrap things up, let's just talk about some things that are worth talking about, but maybe not worth discussing. It happened, but it's not of great import. Like Mr. Satan's receding hairline between age 781 and 784. Krillin completely changing his style. Again. I mean, he seems to be the most stylish and fashionable character in Z. I mean, he changes it all the time. And then, of course, who could forget the legend that is Captain Chicken. And despite my enthusiasm for chicken-themed superheroes, there are still things that Toei needs to address before we get to the end of Z, if they want to keep that original and genuine and part of the canon, instead of it being forgotten or just tossed aside. So if people talk about Dragon Ball Z, they just go, oh, just watch up to 287, those last 3 episodes don't really mean anything. I don't think we want that to happen, do we? Goten and Trunks need to be taken out of the time fridge and allow them to grow up a bit so they can get to that in a genuine and realistic way. You did it with Gohan, so why not do the same for the boys, okay? So what do you guys think? Do you think Super or the series that comes after Super could fix these problems? Or do you think we'll just get a completely, totally fresh retcon? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Until the next one, be sure to like and subscribe. Catch you later!